Hey there, welcome to Blockhead, the Peanuts Tribute podcast from a cartoonist's point of view. My name is Jeff Grogan, and I will be your host for the next few minutes to talk about Peanuts, Charles Schulz, and all things Charlie Brown, Linus, Lucy, and Snoopy too. So sit back and enjoy. Hey there, Blockhead listeners. Welcome to a new edition of the podcast. Where do we begin today? Today we've woken to the riots in Minneapolis and a lot of the things that are going on as a result of the death of George Floyd at the hands of the police in Minnesota. And I just feel so overwhelmed. Thinking about where we're at and where we've come from and how we got here, and it seems to me like, and I don't want to get too heavy into politics, but this is my podcast, right? And I feel like I have to say what I have to say, and the events of this year, the past few months, whether we're talking about Trump or we're talking about COVID or the protests at the Michigan State House to Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, and then the riots last night and this morning. All of that together, I think, is just overwhelming. And it has me feeling a great deal of sadness. And it's a very sad day. And I feel despair, and I think a lot of us feel despair. I feel shame, and I feel guilt. You can call it white liberal guilt if you want to. It's what it is, but it's guilt all the same. And it seems to me that this might be the saddest time of my lifetime. I don't really recall a time in my lifetime when it seemed like, the very air we breathe seemed so thick with hate. And it's as though in some ways like COVID was some kind of manifestation of our collective ignorance and greed and hostility all at once. I don't believe in, those kinds of biblical plagues, but it does seem to coincide with this period of terrible ill will. I am not a violent person, and I would never advocate violence as a vehicle for change. But a lot of people have pointed out today, that Martin Luther King said that when the voices of the unheard, when that goes on long enough, they will make themselves known. And you can't condemn the one without acknowledging and condemning the conditions they live with and struggle with every day. And I'm sorry, but being asked to wear a mask for the public good to stave off a pandemic, whether it's Michigan or anywhere else, is not such a condition. But the systematic suppression and killing of a people is. I thought the election of Barack Obama was the first step towards a better world, but every time we seem to take a step forward, somehow or another, the forces of hate and ignorance and ill will push us back 3 steps. And I don't have any answers for how we get past this. I just don't. I don't have any great, I can't make any great pronouncements here on a comics podcast. But I do know that we have to find a way to overcome the divisions between us and stop glorifying some kind of imagined past We have to work to build and imagine a better world. A world where we live side by side with one another, with dignity and love and respect. A place where we don't encourage hate of our differences, but instead we revel in our shared commonalities and we delight in the things that make us unique. Where does comics come in to all of that, you know? Where does comics fit? You know, it doesn't seem like we can tackle such a big thing. It seems overwhelming, something that's far beyond the reach of cartoonists. But cartoonists like Tahid Bondia, Kevin Much, Khalid Birdsong, and today's guest, Jan Eliot, all create comics that realize such worlds where people of different races and different sexual orientations, different genders, different philosophies and religions share their lives with one another freely and equally. I know, you know, we all know, comics and cartoonists aren't going to change the world. Art's not going to change the world. But they are part of, they do contribute to the conversation. They are an important part of the conversation. They are ways in which we express our voices. Voices that may not have a platform otherwise find it through comics. And as that conversation goes on and evolves, the momentum from that discussion will result in change. I do believe that. We will continue, to struggle with disparities across the board. But it seems to me that in my lifetime, while we are where we are right now, that conversation has moved us forward on a number of issues. And because of that, I think there's hope. I don't want to overstate, the political implications of Jan's work or Tahid's work or Kevin's or Khalid's. I mean, they're not writing political treatises. They're not writing polemics. They're not doing op-ed pieces for the Times or for other media outlets. They're making comics. But in art, in comics, what we do as artists is we create. We create worlds that where we imagine a better place sometimes. Sometimes we express thoughts and feelings about the world we inhabit now. But overall, what we do is we try to create, not to construct or build borders or boundaries between us. We create for the opposite reason. We create to knock down barriers and boundaries between us. And the goal, it seems to me, of every creative work, every work that an artist has made, or a musician has made, or an actor has played a part in, or an author has written, the goal of every creative work is to inspire someone, somewhere, anywhere, whomever, wherever they are, to pick up a pencil, a drum, a guitar, a needle and thread, a hammer, and to encourage and inspire them to add and build upon what has gone before, to add to the conversation and move it forward. We have to keep doing our work. We will keep doing our work. Despite how dark things may seem, how impossible the odds may seem, we will keep doing our work and contributing to the dialogue. We will break down those barriers. We will reach across divisions. And someday, maybe not in my lifetime, hopefully in yours, someday, the world we imagine will come to be. That's my hope. And I think when we are faced with what we're faced with today, and this year, we have to find hope. And we have to find ways to keep hope alive. And we're not politicians. We're not lawyers. We're not police officers. We are cartoonists. We're artists, and in our small way, by working every day, we keep that hope alive. So Jan Eliot makes a wonderful comic strip called Stone Soup. And Jan describes it as a feminist comic strip. And indeed it is. But it's feminist because it's from, define feminist, feminist is in my way a belief that all things should be equal, There should not be disparities between men and women in the world, in the workplace, at the home, in the home, or elsewhere, that we should be on equal footing with one another. And this is the world that Jan creates in Stone Soup. And when she started it, there wasn't a voice on the comics page expressing the concerns and the life of single moms. And Jan Eliot's Stone Soup was the embodiment of the comics embodiment of that experience for women on the comics page when there hadn't been and wasn't any other. It was groundbreaking, is groundbreaking. But as I said, it's not a polemic. It doesn't keep anybody out. It invites you in. And it creates a world that is funny and vibrant and alive and filled with life and love. And it's a wonderful strip, and I love it a lot. And I hope you've got it in your local paper. If you haven't, I hope you check it out on Go Comics, because that's where it can be found. And I hope you'll dive into the world of Stone Soup, because it's a wonderful comic strip. And if we look at it with a slight nod to politics, we can say that it imagines a world that is egalitarian and a world we can happily share, and a positive world. And I think that's what Tawhid does with crabgrass. And as important as I think a problem like Jamal was and is as a voice, I think crabgrass goes a step farther in showing us a world that moves beyond our systematic problems. A world where two young kids of different races can live and love and grow up together and love each other as friends do. So, thus endeth the polemic, if you will, today. But it's a tough day. And I felt I had to say something. So, let's move forward, okay? Let's move forward and talk about comics. Let's talk about Stone Soup and Jan Eliot. So it's, as I said, it's a wonderful comic strip, and Jan is just a great guest up. This has to be, one of my favorite conversations. It was just so free and relaxed, and I really enjoyed talking to Jan, and I hope I get a chance to do it again sometime. It's going to be in 2 parts because it did go on for a while. We had a lot to say to each other. It was great, and so it'll be in 2 parts. I'm going to drop the second part really quickly because I noticed I'm not really sure whether you guys want to hear the shows all in one big bunch or you want to hear them in a couple of parts. But I'm going to drop it in 2 parts that are, one right after the other. So one is today, another might be Monday, okay? So be on the lookout for it. It's going to come quick. Might even be sooner than that, I don't know. But anyway, I'm experimenting with how quickly they go out. And what else did I want to say? There was something else on my mind, and it's now slipping my mind. Let me pause for a second and see if I can remember. Oh yeah, now I remember. So the conversation actually started by Jan asking me a little bit about myself, and so you're going to hear the first voice you'll hear is mine, and talking about myself, and we sort of get right into the conversation before I've even introduced her to the show. So be prepared for that. The first 10, 15 minutes or so are really Jan and I just saying hi and getting to know one another, very informally and very much about talking about just everything, and then we get into the discussion about comics and Stone Soup and all of that, and so it has a little different beginning than usual. Okay, enough of me. Let's get right to it. Jan Eliot and myself in conversation. I started off as a cartoonist as a kid, and then that was going nowhere, so I studied painting in school. Because you know what they do to you when you're, at least when we were young in school, they didn't like cartoonists. So,
right.
So then I started painting and all that stuff. And anyway, it eventually led to graduate school. And then lucky enough for me, I found some gigs teaching, and that became my life.
And, so great.
Yeah, and that eventually just evolved back into comics again, because that's where my interests were. And so I sort of fooled them, I came in as a painter and then I gradually subverted it, to comics.
That's so great. Yeah, what university is it on Long Island?
Adelphi University.
Oh, that's great. Do you know Ben Saunders?
Ben Saunders, that name is awful familiar.
He runs he created and runs the comics program at the University of Oregon.
Oh, no, I don't know him, but I do know the name.
Yeah, he's wonderful. He's like a Shakespeare professor. He came in as a literature guy and then started a comics program. And so he's not an art guy, and they don't teach it from an art standpoint. They teach it. It's more multi-discipline, and it's through the English department.
Yeah, and that's a phenomenon. It's a really interesting phenomenon that a lot of comics programs are being taught through literature programs, through the English department. And rather than and it's so funny. I remember going to there was a thing at Billy Ireland in 2012, and I had just become chair of the art department. And I was very fortunate because I was given the opportunity to go to this thing in Ohio when the Billy Ireland Library was opening. It was a real big, exciting...
I'm sorry I wasn't there. I couldn't go to that one. It would have been great.
It was fun. Yeah, it was so much fun and so exciting and moving, really.
Yeah.
Because, this was Ohio State opened this big, beautiful library and the collection that's there and everything. It was just really moving.
Yeah.
Anyway, I noted that there weren't any representatives from the art department there. There were some from the English department. And, it just came to, and among the people who were there attending as well, most were from either film studies programs or English departments, literature programs, but none from art departments. And I found it to be the weirdest thing. But it's almost as though art departments have this idea, or at least they just kept comics at a distance for some reason.
I think so. I absolutely think so. I don't think. I mean, there's still this argument about, if you're a cartoonist, are you an artist? It's like, really?
At this point, really? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is.
So having an art program, which, we have an art program, and I don't know that if I hadn't come in as a painter, collage artist beforehand, I'm not sure that they ever would have been looking for a cartoonist.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Right. Sure. 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 Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just through the back door in a way I got in.
Yeah.
And I've yet to find like tenured art cartoonists, at universities. I don't know if I'm the only tenured cartoonist, but I think there may be a few here and there. And I know Linda Berry is teaching now. And
Oh, and she's such an unusually wonderful person. Have you ever heard her speak?
no, I have not. I know there are
If you,
YouTube videos, but I
oh,
haven't checked them out. She's
if you,
inspirational, I bet.
oh my God, she's such a wonderful speaker. I've been in a workshop of hers, and then she came and spoke at the National Cartoonist Society convention in Portland. I don't know, maybe 3 years ago or 4 years ago, and I mean, the room was spellbound. Her mind is amazing. She is
Oh,
just amazing.
oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
I
She's
just,
so bright. She's just so bright.
hmm
I don't know. I mean, I hesitate to say she's more writer than artist, but I
hmm
just think that would be unfair. She's simply an artist, and that is, you know,
in
and,
in the
and everything she does is what she does, I mean,
Absolutely. In the
mhm.
broadest sense of the word, she's
Yeah. Yeah.
when we think of artists, I mean, and there's that. I mean, the word cartoonist is a wonderful word. I mean, unfortunately, some people have this tendency to look down upon it. But when you think of what a cartoonist is, it is an artist who is an artist in a very broad sense of the definition. It encompasses, multimedia and
Right. Right.
drawing, storyboarding, conceiving of time-based work in the sense that you need a progression of images, and you write both visually and verbally.
Correct. Right.
So it's an
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's an honor to be called cartoonist, I think.
I think so. I definitely think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I absolutely. So, well, this is great. We haven't even started to talk about you
No, it's
already.
so interesting. Well, I was going to encourage you,
Mhm.
if you ever wanted to reach out to a fellow in another comics program. Ben Saunders is a wonderful person. I taught a class for him once, and he's just a lovely guy. He's British. So he has this great British accent, and I don't know, how old are you?
What am I now? I just turned 60 on Monday.
Okay, so he's probably closer to 50,
Okay.
coming up on 50. So he's a little bit younger, but he grew up in comics and in the world, especially. Well, I don't know. He's a big Peanuts fan, but also all the adventure comics and all of it. Anyway, he's a great guy. So if you ever want to reach out to a colleague, he'd be very receptive.
Well, actually, I will.
Mhm.
Maybe it'd be kind of cool to have him on the show.
Oh yeah, he's very knowledgeable, and boy,
Yeah.
he has no problem talking. Let me tell you.
So what did you teach for it?
I taught a creating comics class.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it was, again, interdisciplinary. So we had a few students who really were artists and drew beautiful comics,
Mm-hmm.
and the rest were, just fans and interested and coming at it from the uh, the writing standpoint. And so the class was much more about, it wasn't in an art studio. It was about writing comics and illustrating them to your best of your ability, but understanding storyline, and it wasn't required that you had to be funny. It could be graphic novelish, whatever, um, and it had a lot to do with working um, consistently, sort of on a deadline,
Mm-hmm.
that there were obligations to create,
Right.
to decide in the beginning what your comic was going to be about, and then create installments each week, and the students exchanged installments, and we talked about it. And it was my first time
Mm-hmm.
teaching, and I think I did a pretty good job. But it was a challenge, trying to introduce them to some, a little bit to the history of comics, and
Mm-hmm.
the methods, a little bit of the methods, just basic stuff. Because again, it wasn't an art class; it was through the English department.
Right. Sure.
But you can always give people some basic, hands, feet, faces, expression, perspective,
Yeah.
understanding how to use Photoshop to the best of its ability, so that you don't screw up what you've done because you didn't know how to scan it, and
Right.
that kind of thing. So.
Right. Yeah. I teach a visual narrative class that has, it's a mix of students. A few of them are from the art department. A lot of them come from the communications department. Some come from computer science because they're in this video games minor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so they come with a wide array of abilities when it comes to drawing.
Uh-huh.
And I've had some wonderful comics turned out by kids who have very rudimentary graphic skills.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Although that course has become more and more about storyboarding as time goes on,
Oh,
to the connection to the video games minor. But
right.
close enough, But
Right, right. I mean, sometimes you meet these kids. I've had them in my studio who, oh God, this one kid, and I have seen him recently. He's a 20 something now, but at the time he came to see me, he was maybe in the 8th grade, kind of lower economic group,
hmm
um, terrible acne, terribly shy, barely could speak to me, and to the point where I kind of wondered, why are you in my studio? Why are we here? And then he started showing me his stuff, which his drawing was, very, very basic. But the words, oh my God, the emotion and the complexity. I mean, it was wonderful stuff. And I ended up, telling him I really hoped he figured out a way to continue on, at least at the community college level,
hmm
because I mean, what he had to say was incredible. And not everybody has that either,
Yeah.
And in a way, I think you can learn to draw more easily than you can learn to figure out what to say,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. Because
yeah.
the message or whatever it is you have to say is something that's innate in some sense, and comes
Right,
from experience and who
right.
you
And who
are.
you are, and
Yeah.
yeah.
But when it's but drawing is a skill, yeah, that to a certain degree can be learned. Anybody can learn it, and all kids draw up to a point.
Yes, yes,
you
right.
know uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, and it's one thing that I found too is that in this storyboarding class, uh, almost every student's drawing improves greatly from the beginning to the end,
Right, right, right.
depending on whatever level. But a certain kind of drawing is not necessary for every particular kind of comic, and
Sure,
you
sure.
don't have to draw like Neil Adams for every comic strip, or
Right,
comic
right,
book,
right.
and to each his own, right? And
Oh
each
yeah,
visual style.
absolutely,
Yeah, so
absolutely. Yeah,
it's
yeah,
pretty cool.
yeah.
So this is great, interesting. So that was kind of an interesting experience. Have you taught again since that time? Or
I haven't. I am older than you,
Mhm.
and more. I'm only doing my cartoon once a week now,
Right.
and I I taught that class right at the moment I went from dailies to Sundays only,
Oh.
and it was convenient because I had the time to do it. But
hmm
I just found it exhausting.
Oh yeah.
I liked my students. Ben did everything to make it a great experience. I mean, the class was limited to 13, and they were very interesting, and it was a great group. But the responsibility, I mean, I admire what you do so much, because the responsibility of putting together a meaningful experience for them, and it
hmm
was like a 400 level class. I mean, I
Oh.
had to, um, and I just, it was just not a commitment I wanted at that
Yeah.
point, when I was, at the moment in my life when I was downsizing, so that I love to travel, and that was my goal, to be able to travel more. And
Sure.
he only wanted me to teach one term a year, or every other year even, but I just found it, yeah, too exhausting, and so I declined to continue. He asked if I would do it again, but I just decided not to.
Well, and there's no shame in that. I mean, it's just a matter of where you want your life to go and what priorities you have. It's kind of a
Yeah,
great experience to have. And once you get into it, like anything else, you become, obviously, you just become more proficient at it, and it's not quite as taxing. But it
I
is
know.
always, it's always pretty overwhelming. And
Yes.
this recent change to online teaching, which happened so quickly, has been just, oh my gosh, the amount of work. It's like going back to the beginning and starting all over again. And,
I'm sure.
yeah, and so the experience that you felt there, I'm kind of feeling now, even after having taught at Adelphi for 20 plus years. It's like I've had to start all over again
Uh-huh.
the last
Yeah.
2 months, and
Yeah.
it's been a lot of work, and it's
Yeah.
nonstop. And
Yeah.
but at the same time, this semester I'm doing a history of animation course, and I'm really, while it's just huge amount of work doing the recording and the videos and the whole bit, it's also so gratifying because I love the history of comics. I love the history of animation. I just love this stuff.
That's
And,
so great.
and so it's
That's so
gratifying.
great.
It's a lot of work, but it's gratifying. Uh,
That's
I hope the
great.
kids get that. That's the one thing. Anytime I'm in a class, I don't ever think about necessarily. I mean, you come across a couple of kids who are really serious, and you hope they go forward, and you want to help them to the greatest degree that you can. But at the same time, you've got a lot of students who never will, and
Right. Right.
have no intention to do so. And all I really hope I pass along to them is a passion for the subject. And that maybe they'll go search out some comics or an animated film they never have
Right.
looked
Right. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know
It's true. Yeah. You do have to look at it in the long haul like that. That it and I mean I used to have a lot of eighth graders come through the studio because they
hmm
have these mentorship things they're supposed to do, visit people
uh,
and that kind of stuff. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a letter from somebody that, I don't know if you remember me. And of course, unfortunately, I don't, because if it was, 15 years ago, I may
right,
or may, and they were here for a day. Um, but, they'll talk about what a meaningful experience it was. It mattered to them that, they haven't forgotten it. That it was fascinating. I mean, it does
sure.
make it is stuff they will carry forward in one way or another.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
Meeting a cartoonist and meeting you, it must be just like, wow, that's got to be an experience that imprints on their mind. How often
Well,
go to a
I,
cartoonist studio?
yeah, I hope. I hope. And I mean, it's not that I'm so, amazing or famous, but I mean, it is just being in a studio. I know personally, I love visiting other people's studios and kind of
hmm
seeing, how they work and what the environment is, um, and then the reality of it. It looks like magic when you're not used to doing it every day, like I am. So
Right, right.
it looks like magic to them, 'cause,
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful thing about drawing. When we were kids, I mean, I'm a little guy, and I was always a little guy, and I used to get picked on. One way to get out of getting picked on was to draw. And so I could do a drawing, and if somebody start pushing you around a little bit, and you just find out what they wanted you to draw, whether it was Snoopy,
uh-huh,
Charlie Brown,
uh-huh,
or it was
uh-huh,
Spider-Man, or whatever.
uh-huh,
And
uh-huh.
drawing was a kind of magic.
Yes,
And I think kids do find it, and well, maybe some adults still find it a kind of magic.
I
You
think so. I think so. I mean, even at a book signing, when you just do a little sketch for somebody under your autograph, I mean, they just go bananas, And it's
Yeah,
like, wow, it's like, Bill, I'm so happy to be able to make you happy so easily.
yeah, yeah. And this is true, I think, in particular of your work on Stone Soup. You just make it look so effortless. I mean, that's one of the things I just love about your work is
Oh,
it
thank
just
you.
looks effortless. It's just like you breathed it,
Oh,
out
that's
on the
so
page.
nice. What a nice thing to say. That's
Well,
really nice. Thank
Uh,
you.
well, it's true. I guess I should say right now, if folks don't realize by now, we're talking to Jan Eliot, the cartoonist behind the wonderful Stone Soup comic strip, and this is a real pleasure. So, welcome to Blockhead, Jan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure for me too. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. So, we were just talking about teaching and talking about mentoring. And one of the things I didn't realize, but I think I just came across somewhere, was that you mentored a little bit with Lynn Johnston.
I did. I did. I Lynn. I reached out to Lynn well, I had been a fan, of course, for years, and Lynn and I are actually pretty close to the same age. It's
Oh,
just that she got started much sooner. I didn't get syndicated until I was 45, so
wow. Okay.
she'd been in the business a lot longer than I had. And I don't know if you remember the Lawrence series where the the next door neighbor boy came out to his
Oh,
parents and got thrown out of the house.
sure, of course.
Yeah, very, very famous
Yeah,
series in
absolutely.
her career. And unfortunately, I heard that there was a place in Oregon that was just uh, mobbing her with hate mail. It
Mm,
was coming from Southern Oregon, and she took a lot of blowback for doing that, and she was
y-
completely prepared for that. And uh, and of course, it was a beautiful series, and there was nothing anyone could object to if they read the whole thing, from start to finish. And it was a lovely story. But anyway, I felt a little guilty about my fellow Oregonians, and I wrote her a fan letter about how impressed I was with how she had handled it. And I did, in fact, include some of my own work because, I was wishfully, at that time, I was still doing just a weekly cartoon for a couple local newspapers and
okay.
not syndicated yet. And so I sent my work to her, and she called me on a Sunday morning. And honestly, I was in the shower. My husband came and got me. And, I got out of the shower
Sure.
and, spoke with her. And it was so kind. She just called to say thank you, but to say that she liked my work, and she was very encouraging. And she said, I really think you're going to get syndicated. I think it might take you a year, but I really think this is going to happen for you. And boy, I needed to hear that at that point
Wow.
in time. And so and in fact, she was right, and there was nothing she could have done to influence that, because it doesn't really work that way. Syndicates don't really care, what other people
Mhm.
think. But as it happens, I am with the same syndicate that syndicates for better or for worse. But I had been sending them my work regularly for quite some time. So yes, she was really helpful. And then she gave me quite a bit of business advice, which was very helpful, because the whole thing was sort of a scary enterprise. As it turns out, I had nothing to fear, because my syndicate is it's a great company, and nobody was trying to take advantage of me or anything like that. But you just don't know what you have to sign. I mean, what they ask you initially is to sign a 25-year contract,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
and it is, I mean, there's ways to get out of it if there's no money coming forward, of course,
Hmm.
but it's daunting, and
Sure.
so I was able to reduce mine to 20, because I just thought that was just excessive,
Hmm.
especially considering my age when I started. But they were great to work with. But yes, she was a person I could call and ask advice from, and I was concerned about various aspects of production, and she's just been a great friend ever since.
Oh, that's wonderful.
She's been just lovely. Ted and I, my husband and I, were able to visit her when she lived up in near well, in Ontario, North
Hmm.
Ontario, and now
Hmm.
she lives in Vancouver. And we were supposed to go see her in June, but thank you, COVID. I'm not sure
Yeah.
any of us are going to be making that trip. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, she's been very inspiring to me. A lot of discussions about work, how you manage the deadlines. I really got some great advice from her about how important it was to stay ahead of deadlines, because if you are always, if every week is critical, that you're finished by 3 o'clock on Friday or whatever it is, whatever your deadline is. Um, and syndicates are serious about deadlines. I mean, they fine you if you don't get it in on time.
They fine you.
They do, because, well, they have to, because there are some really flaky cartoonists in the world.
Yeah.
And, and
Tell me
if you,
something.
yeah, tell you something you don't know.
Right.
And I mean, if you are late, it can cost them money, because then especially in the old days before everything was digital, they're sending things out FedEx
Yeah.
overnight instead
Yeah.
of, by normal channels. And, people have to work overtime to make it happen. And, so anyway, but the main reason not to be on top of deadline all the time is that you don't want the job to be a ball and chain. If like she said, if somebody calls and says, hey, we think we can come visit you, next week for 2 days, she said, you want to be able to do that. You
Yeah.
want to be able to stop work. And the only way you can stop work for something that you really want to do, that's fun, that's family, whatever, is you have to have a cushion, and you'll be
Mhm.
much happier throughout your long career if you have a cushion. And I have always taken that to heart and always tried to make sure I had at least extra week under my belt. And also for mental health, you have a bad day, you don't feel funny every day. You don't want to be in the studio every day. Maybe you have an ill parent, or, things happen in life. And you need to just be able to blow off a day now. So
Sure.
yeah, so she's just been such great moral support for me. And she also is the person who introduced me to Charles Schulz, which was
Oh,
another great gift
oh my
of
gosh.
from
Well,
her.
tell me
Yeah.
about that.
Well, Lynn and Sparky were very good friends.
Mhm.
And as he was also very good friends with Kathy Guisewhite and many
Yeah.
other cartoonists. Um, and one of the great things about knowing him, so I'll tell you how I met him.
Mhm.
Um, we were at, I think, my very first Reuben, National Cartoonist Society Reuben Awards event. It was in New York at the Waldorf Astoria. It was the 50th anniversary of the NCS. So it
Oh,
was very, it was
big deal.
lovely. It was a
Yeah.
big deal. It was
Yeah.
really lovely. And she had sponsored me to get into the NCS, and so she came to find me at breakfast first morning, and she hauls me across the dining room to meet Sparky, and the poor man is, he's just leaving the buffet line with, one plate with a Danish and the other plate with a cup of coffee and a saucer, and he had a bit of a shake, and
Oh,
so he's shaking, these, I can hear the cup rattling a little bit, and
uh-huh.
he just wants to get to his table. And Lynn stops him because she was effervescent and, and loved him and had that relationship. And so I didn't feel like it was a great meeting. I mean, she introduced me and, yeah, yeah. He sat down and I thanked her, and I felt really awkward. So um, after we got home from that weekend, uh, and I have to say, getting to see Charles Schulz in a tuxedo dance with Kathy Guisewhite in front of an orchestra at the Waldorf Astoria
Oh my
was
gosh.
quite a treat. It was
Yeah.
really quite a treat. And he was a handsome man, and I mean, he was just a sweetheart. So anyway, after the weekend, I came back and I felt kind of bad, and my first book had been published by Andrews McMeel, and so I decided to mail him a copy um, and just thank him and tell him I felt, kind of bad about interrupting his breakfast. Whatever I said, felt like it was a bit awkward, but that I really admired his work. And I had learned a lot about cartooning from Peanuts, especially. Actually, I really modeled my lettering after his. I thought his lettering was just so beautiful. And anyway, about a week later, on a Monday morning, he called me, and I honestly thought a friend was playing a joke on me. This person on
Sure.
the other end of the line at 9 in the morning says, is Jan Eliot there? This is she. Well, this is Charles Schulz. And I'm just like gobsmacked. It's like, no.
Uh,
But it was
oh
him.
my
And,
gosh.
he loved my book. He loved my work. And I have to tell you, I had sent him my work before I was syndicated a couple of times. And he does not accept, um, he's not a very willing participant if you haven't gotten to a certain level of accomplishment. In
Yeah.
other words, he doesn't, I mean, you can imagine in his world how busy and
Yeah.
all the demands on his time. So
Yep.
I think the only thing I had ever gotten back from him was because I got kind of insistent about wanting feedback, rudely, I suppose. He wrote me back and said, well, frankly, you don't draw very well.
Ouch. Ouch. Oh man. Ouch.
But at the time, I had a lot to learn. I was still just doing once a week while I had a full-time job. I wasn't able to give it my all. And I also had a family, so my life was pretty hectic. But anyway, we had this lovely conversation. Quite fortunately, I am also a bit of I do love the history of comics as well, and I was a big fan of Percy Crosby, which is one of his very
Skippy.
favorite. Yeah, Skippy, one of his very favorite cartoons. So we were able to have that conversation, and then we were friends. And because I live on the West Coast, he lives on the West Coast. He would hold a party every Christmas at the opening of the Snoopy on Ice show. At his ice rink, right?
Yeah.
He does this ice capades kind of thing. And he would invite any cartoonist who could get there with their family. And you were on your own to get there and get in a hotel. But he hosted you at the performance, and he hosted everyone for a beautiful breakfast the next morning. And it was the most wonderful event. Ted and I got to go about 3 times because unlike the other cartooning events, which are so enormous,
Mm-hmm.
this is like 50 people.
Oh,
And
wow.
there's no agenda. And, Sparky came and sat with us and asked us
Oh,
how we were doing. And at one point he said he had this idea. What did I think of this idea of Linus having a Bible that the zipper was stuck on, and he's trying to work out. And I'm just, hey, would you like to see the studio? Follow me. Oh my God. Yes. Do I want to see your studio? Yes, I do. So, it was really wonderful having a chance to get to know him a bit. I only knew him for about probably 4 years before he passed away, maybe 3 or 4. But it was one of my more wonderful experiences, and thank you, Lynn, for making that happen.
Hey, listeners, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I hope you're enjoying today's interview. If you are and you want to show support, head on over to my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Jeff Grogan. At Patreon, you can contribute as little as $1 on a regular basis to ensure the longevity of this podcast. Your support will help keep it not only commercial-free, but free to the listening public. And in exchange, you'll get some pretty neat stuff. There are at least 3 different tiers. Each level offers its own distinct rewards. So check it out today at patreon.com/Jeff Grogan, GeoffGrogan. Any amount is welcome, and your support is greatly appreciated. Thanks again, and that's patreon.com/Jeff Grogan.
So, yeah, I mean, there's some wonderful cartoonists in the world, and I feel so grateful that I had a chance to get to know a few of them, especially the older ones that we've lost now.
Oh, yeah,
Charles
sure.
Schulz being one of the main ones. I would have loved to have met Walt Kelly too, but I
Oh,
was able to meet his wife, and that was
that's
also
pretty
a
cool.
treat. Yeah, that was pretty cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
who is a cartoonist in her own right, Selby Kelly,
yeah, right. Yeah.
animator. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and did she meet Walt at Disney or?
I think she was a New Yorker,
Okay.
and well, when I met her, she was living in New York. She probably was in Los Angeles at some point. She
Mhm.
worked for Warner Brothers, I
Oh,
think.
okay, okay. Well,
um,
there was a lot of intermingling, Bill
yeah,
Melendez
of course,
from
of
one to
course.
the other. Yeah.
I think she told me that she met him at a pogo party. They used to have pogo parties, and people would dress up as pogo characters
Oh my gosh.
and read the comics.
Oh, what? That's
I mean, I know.
how interesting is that? That's
I know.
wow.
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
It is. It's very cool. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
He'd dress up as Albert the alligator,
I don't know. I really don't. Yeah.
but that's great.
I
Wow.
know. I thought
I
it
would
was a
love
great
to have been a
story.
fly on the wall for that.
Wouldn't you, though? I know. Really and truly. Yeah. That would have been great.
So before we leave Charles Schulz aside for a minute, what elements from Peanuts do you feel as though had the biggest impact on you, aside from the lettering?
Well, it was one of the things that where he broke ground. Unlike his peers, he didn't ever buy gags. His material is extremely personal. It was all his. He didn't ask anybody for ideas. He didn't ask anybody to preview his ideas. Oh, well, other than he did ask me about Linus and the Bible in the zipper. But, he was very proud of the fact that it was all so original. And he wasn't, because, the Dennis the Menace and a lot of that, post-war newspaper comics, those people all had writers.
Right.
They had gag writers. And they considered the cartoonist was the artist. The cartoonist was the person who drew, and that was the most important part. And he really broke ground in making it so personal and so much, so original from his heart, and not afraid to have it be a little melancholy sometimes, and be a little sad, be a little touching, and it didn't always have to be laugh out loud. And then the simplicity of it, the simplicity of the line and the layout of the frames. I mean, it's such a simple comic that it's hard to realize how well all that was done. But, he didn't ever get into, doing a lot of backgrounds. I mean, it worked really well just to have, one character and a curb, or one character and a wall,
Right.
Or a sidewalk, But I think the fact that it was all so original and so personal, and that he really set the bar for that. And then other cartoonists took up the torch, and continued. I mean, Walt Kelly was certainly incredibly original. Brenda Starr was original, and from there it became, well, people still bought gags, because when I got syndicated, I got letters from all these gag writers. It's like,
Wow.
Really? I know, it was kind of, really? I don't know how anybody could write for me, but okay, maybe. Well, I'll tell you, there's a lovely man who lives in New York. His name is Mark Bilgray, and he was the only person who contacted me who I felt was in tune enough. I mean, a lot of the gag writers were older gentlemen, forgive me, not of my generation in a way. And to write for a feminist comic strip without resulting in a lot of cliche was, would be pretty difficult for them. I mean, the samples that they gave me, it's like, no. But Mark, Mark was also a single dad, or a divorced dad, so he had experience in that realm of patchwork family and all that, and very sensitive man. And there was a period of time when my father had Alzheimer's, and I was his main not caregiver. He was in a facility, but I managed his life.
Wow.
And that happened just 5 years into my syndication.
Oh,
and it went on for a long time. I mean, my father was, kind of declining for 10 years. So there were a few years in there when I was really struggling to come up with meaningful material.
Yeah.
It's very hard to write when you are sad, It's just very hard. So anyway, I did buy gags from Mark, and Mark wrote some really, really nice material for me. Not, I wish I could have bought more from him, but it was really helpful during that time period to have somebody else, sending ideas my way. And, even if if you don't use it exactly as it's sent, just it gets something going. And of course you pay for that. You pay, if anything, that helps. So I did take work from Mark. I will always be thankful for that. And then as my own daughters got older and started to have their own children, one of my daughters is extremely funny. And I did start, actually, because she was also in a little bit of financial straits when her children were young. It's like, well, send me stories because I pay for gags. So, and she actually did send me quite a few great, just wonderful antics, that her kids were doing that gave me sparked material and that kind of thing. So occasionally a reader will send me something or a friend will give me an idea that is too good to be true. And if I can get permission, like if they're telling me a story about their teenager, I have to ask the teenager, do you mind if I represent this? Because I don't use people's personal stories without permission. But, you do have some lovely things laid at your feet every now and then that are just too good to pass up. So, but 95% of Stone Soup has always been just out of my head and my heart. So,
Right. And it reads that way. Reads is a very personal strip, and it's interesting that you talked about that in relationship to Charles Schulz. I just did interviews with Marcus Hamilton and Ron Ferdinand.
oh, nice people.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah, yeah.
so sweet, and it's so
Uh-huh.
nice, and really so generous with their time, and we had a great time, and it was really interesting because I'm a big Charles Schulz fan, but I was always a Dennis the Menace fan too, growing up, and it's
Do
interesting
you?
comparing. Yeah,
I have to say just a minute about Dennis the Menace.
yeah,
I learned so much about panel layout
oh yeah,
and the use of black
yeah,
from Hank Ketcham's cartoons. Oh my gosh,
yeah.
those are beautiful drawings, and
Oh man,
people often wonder, well, Dennis the Menace, that it sort of fell out of favor. It's like, well, it's not about whether you relate to the humor or not. It's like, look at those drawings. They
yeah.
are amazing. They are just amazing. So, sorry. Anyway.
Oh no, and that's exactly one of the things that resonates in my mind over and over again. Whenever I think of Dennis the Menace, the first thing that comes to my mind is Hank Ketcham's line.
Yes.
And it's the first thing I think of, and
Mhm.
I can see it, so clearly. And I think, when you first go to art school, one of the things that they hit you over the head with in drawing classes, line weight, and it stays with you, and you begin to
Yes.
appreciate it. You appreciate what it feels like to put it down on a piece of paper, and you enjoy that and revere it. And so Hank Ketcham is just,
Yeah.
one of those people whose line is just, oh my gosh, so
Yeah.
beautiful. And
Did you ever know if he used a brush or a pen? I don't think I ever knew.
he used a pen, and
Okay.
I think he might have augmented it with a brush. But
Hmm.
um, and actually, both Ron and Marcus said that he introduced them to the speedball tip that he used,
Ah,
and they had to use the same one, and both of them
of
still
course.
do. Use that.
Uh-huh.
And I can't
Sure.
remember. Is it Hunt's something or other? I can't remember.
Yeah, there are some classics. There's a great old book called Backstage at the Strips
Okay.
by, I think Mort Walker wrote it. And
Okay.
it actually shows every cartoonist of his era and um,
Wow.
what pen they actually used and how they did. It's fascinating. It's a
That is
great book.
fascinating. Yeah,
Yeah.
because people like us were just like eating that stuff
Yeah,
up. It's,
I
oh
know.
my God, how do you get that
Well, I
line?
did in the beginning. It's how I'm a self-taught cartoonist.
Right.
I went to art school. I went to university art department for a couple of years. And, I had drawing classes and lessons when I was in high school, but, I knew how to draw. But as far as cartooning goes, I really had to learn all that by actually reading books like that. How do they do it? What materials do they use?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I went through a similar experience, and in fact, when it comes to cartooning, none of the they just never offered classes like that, and
No.
so when we were growing up, and I think I'm, about 10 years or so younger than you, and I know that folks around my generation, maybe up until 1970 or so, that just courses weren't available and the material wasn't available. How do you learn
No.
how to do
No.
this?
I
What
know.
size do you draw?
Oh, I
It's
know. I got some great advice. Who did I get this advice from? It's funny, the little things you get. Um, and it might have been Mort Walker, that you take a cartoon out of cut it out of the newspaper, as we used to. That's the only way we got them originally.
yeah.
And on a photocopier, blow it up to the size you draw.
That's right. It's so
And then you will be able to see, like, how big is the lettering supposed to be? How big is the leading, the space in between the lines of the lettering supposed to be, so that it reduces down and prints, and how heavy is the line and how dense is the cross hatching, because it might surprise you, it will surprise you.
yeah.
Because it's nothing. When I first was doing a weekly cartoon, and boy, I had some disasters in the beginning when I'd open up the paper and see what had become of my cartoon, because I wasn't using, I just wasn't doing it right. And it's trial by fire. You learn pretty quickly,
Yeah,
but
and
blowing up another cartoon to the size you draw, that was the best advice I ever got. It's like, oh, now I see what this drawing looked like when they started.
Absolutely. And it's so, you think it's such a simple idea. Of course,
Yeah.
you have to have a photocopier available and there was a period of time, back in the day, right?
You had to go somewhere.
You
Yes,
had to go someplace. I
you
I
did.
I did these comics back when I was about 19 or 20. I did a whole series of comics that, my trial comic strip. And the sizes were just all made up out of my head. I had no idea what size to do.
Sure.
And I remember going to a copy store to get these copied, and I had to drive like 40 minutes to get to the copy store.
Oh my God.
It was crazy. And then they didn't have the size machine because my drawings were too big. So then I had to photograph, copy them half of one page at a time, and then paste them all together after the fact. It was ridiculous.
But listen, in the beginning, I couldn't afford a scanner that was big enough for my artwork.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I was scanning my artwork in two pieces
Mm-hmm.
and piecing it together in Photoshop. I got real proficient at it, but there was this day when my husband was trying to help me when I was behind. It was coming up on Christmas, and he looked at me and he said, "I thought you were a professional. We need to get you a bigger
Better
scanner."
scan. So I hope, yeah. And so you still work old school, right?
I
And
do. I do.
yeah.
Yes, I work with
So,
a Gillette 303 dip
okay.
pen, and I India ink on a light table, and I work on kind of a weird paper because I spent a lot of years as a graphic artist, and
Mhm.
I got used to working with clay coat papers because they're so crisp. The line is so crisp, and
Oh,
so it's to other people it seems very odd, but it does produce an amazing line, and you can enlarge it quite a bit without seeing any spidering of any kind. So
oh, really?
yeah,
What's it called again? Clayco paper?
it's a clay coat.
Oh,
It's
clay coat.
yeah. If you just think of a basic, it's not an expensive paper. It's what for instance, a lot of book covers are printed on. It's
Mm-hmm.
like there's different versions. We used to have one called Shasta that we worked on, but it has this light. It's not super glossy. It has this light sheen to it, and it actually is a clay coating, slight
Mm-hmm.
clay coating, and so that the ink sits right on top of it. So
Oh,
for
yeah.
printing of something like a book cover, it's very bright, but it also has this magic quality because it has this light clay coat. If you have a sharp X-Acto and you make a small error with ink, you can just scrape it off. You can just lightly scrape. You're not digging into the paper, just scraping, and the ink will come off. And so to fix perfect corners and things like that, or a little bit of a mistake in a letter, you don't have to use whiteout. But anyway, it's a personal quirk of mine. I've never met anybody else who works on the kind of paper I work on, but it's cheap. I buy it at print shops. They cut it to me for me to the size of that I draw to the strip size, and I have stacks of it, and
Wow.
yeah, it's great. And
That's
then
pretty.
I used to letter with a speedball pen, but I switched when I heard that Jim Borgman uses disposable pens. I decided if it was good enough for Zitz, it was good enough for me. So I went to using microns for lettering. I have to admit, it is a lot easier and
Yeah.
a lot faster.
Oh,
And yeah, and I work on a light table, so it's pretty easy to end up with a very clean drawing at the end.
so you do your
And
pencils on another piece of paper and then.
I do the pencils on just on a cheap bond paper, and then I created a grid for drawing. It's like it has all the possible box combinations that
Mm-hmm.
I might need,
Mm-hmm.
and it has a lettering guide, and it's just also on bond paper, and I tape that to the light table, and then I use that to create the boxes and the lettering, so
Okay.
that it's first of all I don't have to measure every time,
Yeah.
and the lettering always looks nice. You don't realize how important it is, but when you think about having something be legible in a newspaper, it just works better. It's not the same as a graphic novel, where it can kind of be more freeform. It
Right.
just seems, you know,
It's got to be
easier on
legible.
the eyes. It's got to be legible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I get rid of that and I put the pencil drawing underneath and ink on top of it. So
Well,
That's my
I think
favorite part of the process. It's
is
like it's so relaxing, when all
the
that,
ink.
just the inking. Yeah, it's like meditative.
Yeah, well, it is, and you have a beautiful line, by the way.
Thank you.
I really enjoy the line and the flowing kind of quality of your forms. Val's hair is one of my favorite things
That's
it's just
nice.
great. Yeah, you do a great job with it. It's just the curls in her hair, it's very great.
Thank you.
Well, and the lettering is absolutely pristine. It's just beautiful.
Thank
And
you.
that's one of the things that I talk about with students all the time because they immediately want to just write the lettering any old way. And
Uh-huh.
I get them to buy an Ames lettering guide and sit down and practice because
Uh-huh.
legibility is everything. Even if you give it up at some point and go for a more free form, it's got to be printed and it's got to read
Right, right,
somehow or another.
right,
And
right.
if
Hmm.
it can't be read, then it's of no use.
Yeah,
So
that's right. And like many things in art, you learn to do it. You learn to do it one way, and when you're proficient, with and comfortable with, your skills, then you take liberties
yeah,
because you've already got the skill to do it one way, and you know what you need to do if you want to adapt it. So yeah. Well,
yeah.
thanks. I love working by hand. I've never been tempted to switch to anything like a Cintiq, although I do use a Wacom tablet with my computer for coloring.
For
I love
color.
that. It's easy. It's great.
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. And I mean, and that's another thing about the strip that's really beautiful. I mean, I think it's a really, really elegant and lovely strip to look at. And one of the things, the coloring is just so like the rest of it. It's so enjoyable and it's so unforced and it
Oh,
seems so natural. It's got a great
thank you.
quality. Yeah,
Thank
I
you
really
so
like
much.
it.
I have to tell you, I so struggled in the beginning with color because, first of all, in my years of graphic design, I worked mostly in black and white, so I was very comfortable. I did a lot of
Mhm.
newspaper ads, and I was just very comfortable with basic color and black and white. But when I couldn't believe that I was going to produce this thing for the newspapers, and I was never going to get a proof.
Yeah,
There's no proof, you just have to, and
send
and
it.
it you just send it and hope, and you mock it up with markers or color. Well, in the beginning, okay, way before digital. So in the beginning of my career, we actually mocked up a photocopy or put
Uh-huh.
tissue over the drawing, and with markers or colored pencils, you marked in where the color was supposed to go and gave it a number from a
R-
guide that they gave you. And I mean, that is a frightening experience
Yeah, because you
because you have no idea,
no
you
idea
know.
what it's going to look like.
No. And when Pantone markers came out, it was a little easier to get, you could get a Pantone marker that is pretty close to
Hmm.
the CMYK colors that you're working with, and that was helpful. Um, but and then even graduating to Photoshop and doing it, being able to print out the color, there's no guarantee that what you see on your screen and even what comes out of your printer is what it's going to look like in the newspaper because it's everything's different, right?
Yep. Hmm.
Everything is different. So man, I felt like I had so much to learn, and so much trial and error. And I finally, one day when I was kind of frustrated, I've always admired, of course, Bill Watterson's work
Oh
first
yeah.
and foremost. And
Hmm.
then Zitz came into being about a year or two, maybe 2 years after my strip was syndicated. And I mean,
Oh yeah.
Jim and Jerry, oh my God, that strip is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And so one day I took the Sunday Funnies, laid it out in my studio, and I took my lettering guide. So it looks, I cut it up into strips, so it looks kind of like a Pantone book. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
So there's strips of color, and
Uh-huh.
I punched a hole in each block of color, and I laid it on the Sunday Funnies, trying to match what
Oh wow. Yeah.
Zitz was doing and what Bill Watterson was doing because
Uh-huh.
I admired their colors so much. It's like, okay, I need to know really what these colors are because you can think by looking at it, and then when you actually, get down on your hands and knees and compare, you may realize it's much lighter than what you have been working with. So I kind of used Zitz and Calvin and Hobbes as coloring guides for a while when I was just stumped at how to, I feel like I have my own palette now, and I'm pretty comfortable with my colors, and I don't really feel the need to. I don't worry too much anymore. But boy, it was such a struggle in the beginning to feel like I was doing a good enough job. And I even got I'm pretty good friends with Wiley Miller, who does Non Sequitur, and
Right.
He's a big Stone Soup fan, which I have always been so flattered by. And he is a very frank person, and he'll write and tell me, you have to quit using that color on Val. It doesn't work with her red hair.
Oh my.
It's just like, I love your strip. I want you. People need to be able to see your characters' faces. You're using too bright of colors. It's not, Okay. So thank goodness for our peers,
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. It's great it's great that somebody who loves it so much, they just want everybody to feel the same way they do.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
know. It's so nice. Yeah.
it's great. And
He is a wonderful colorist. My
yeah,
gosh. Yeah.
yeah, he's a
Yeah.
great, illustrator too.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
amazing.
But there are so many wonderful ones, and you've identified, three people who are great to learn from. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly Bill Watterson and Zitz is just an incredible strip. I mean, they're all great, and yours is one of them. So it's wonderful.
Thank you.
And,
I have to say that I learned, you complimented my fluidity, and I so appreciate that. And I really feel like I learned that from Bill Watterson. I really spent a lot of time looking at how his characters moved and slouched and lounged, and because his stuff was just so beautifully fluid. And it's just, you can learn so much by studying the masters. It's really true.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sure, there's something to be picked up no matter, what level of experience you've got. There's something to be learned from everyone,
Yeah.
And I think one of the things is to be, no matter what level you're at, is you're always, we're cartoonists. We got into this because we love cartooning. We love looking at the work, and you're always a fan, and so if you ever stop being a fan, it kind of loses the magic, and
It's true.
and so there's always something to be absorbed. You don't get to a point where it's over with. You just keep learning, and
right. Yeah, and there's so much out there. I'm always discovering new things. I mean, just I love to travel, and my gosh, some of the European cartoonists, the things you can find, just randomly in a bookstore in Prague, or, I mean, oh my gosh, there's just the Spanish cartoonists, there's just some incredibly beautiful work out there, way beyond Asterix and the things we may or may not know about European cartoonists. But, oh my gosh.
My wife, I just turned 60, right? So my wife my wife went overboard with birthday gifts this year, and she got me this book just arrived yesterday, and it's Jaime Hernandez from Love and Rockets. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, I do. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, Jaime Hernandez, I love both Gilbert and Jaime Hernandez. Their work is just astounding to me, and so involving and rich. And anyway, this book, it's an artist's edition of Jaime Hernandez, and it is exquisite. And I'm just poring over. I'm never going to leave that book.
Oh wow, what a nice gift! Good points on your wife.
Oh, she's amazing. She's just an amazing.
Wow.
And anyway, it just hit home. It's just like, oh my gosh, this book is amazing. Anyway, it's just the kind of thing that if you are into this stuff, you never stop appreciating it, and you never stop absorbing it, and lessons from everyone who's accomplished, and that's one of the things I look at your work, and I see things that I pointed out in regard to the quality of this quality that feels unforced about it, so natural, is both in the artwork and in the writing, which just flows without. And I don't know what the process is like for you, but it never reads as though you've struggled. It reads as though it's just the natural flow of life.
Oh, that's nice. That's so nice. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, the writing is always first, and if you could see my notebooks, you'd see that there is a certain amount of struggle because there's a lot of things crossed out, and but sure. I think I think one of the things I'm proud of is that I think I'm good at dialogue, that it's really is
Yes.
conversational. It does not feel forced. And sometimes, when I taught my class, for instance, or when I'm talking with a student or a prospective cartoonist, it's like you have to realize nobody says that. What you've written here,
Hmm.
that's not how a person would phrase that. I mean, just have a conversation in your head between these two characters, because what you've written does not sound like a conversation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's a skill, a person can learn. It's just that you have to. I mean, I always speak my scripts out loud when I'm working. I always read it to myself. It's very different than reading it, and you'll realize the flaw if you read it to yourself and you start thinking about as if you were acting out a play.
Sure.
Um, you'll get a sense of whether it sounds stilted or. And then my characters are pretty real to me at this
Yeah.
point, so I
I was
kind
just
of.
going to say that. Those are the two things. I mean, the one thing is absolutely, even when something is unforced, it's usually the result of two things. Somebody has a natural talent for it, but also the amount of hard work that goes into it. It's always the stuff behind the curtain, but when I read your stuff, that conversational tone is absolutely there all the way through it. And the other thing that I think is very clear in Stone Soup is that the characters are very well defined. Their relationships to one another are really well defined. You know them, and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
way they interact with one another, and that reads as very real, very believable, and comes across as authentic because, as you just said, you know those characters.
One of the great privileges of being syndicated for 25 years, as you know, I mean, I've known these characters very well since, the beginning, but it just gets richer and richer. Um, and the characters, while in my script, the characters don't age, but they do develop, they have developed over time. And there's this wonderful quote from, Judy Chicago, the dinner
Oh, sure.
party,
Yep.
in the dinner party. I have the book about the creation of the dinner party, and she was having trouble with a member of her team, a librarian, who was supposed to be cataloging information about all these different women they were representing in the piece. And she was so excited about the project that she was kind of all over the map, because she didn't want to miss anything, gathering maybe too much information or whatever. She was just
Mhm.
not being productive enough. And Judy was trying to get her to limit her focus a little bit. And she said, well, I can't. I might miss something. And there was this amazing quote, and I put it over my desk when I was trying to decide for 100% if I was going to go into cartooning. So I was doing a lot of different, I had a lot of creative outlets, and it's like, pick something, Jan. At some point, pick something and do it. And the quote is, focus has nothing to do with limitation and everything to do with expansion.
Okay. Yeah.
Isn't
Yeah.
that beautiful?
Yeah.
And I
It's,
realize, so when people say to me, wow, how have you been doing that for 25 years? Aren't you sick of it? It's like, no, because it has just gotten bigger. Focusing on these characters. I mean, I love my characters and I love the situation I set up, and it's very personal to me. I was a divorced working mom of two daughters, so it sort of initially came out of my life. Um, but you just get, the more deeply you get into it, the bigger it gets and the more rich it gets. And I've just always loved that it just gets better and better, and it gets easier and easier. It's not harder to write the strip after all these years. It's actually easier to write the strip because, I know what I'm doing, but I also know my characters, and there's so many avenues for me on any given Monday. What's going to happen this week? Um,
sure.
you know,
And you have a great cast to play with,
I think I
right?
do. Yeah, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
variety in generations, and
Yeah.
and if you're brain dead, this is your students must all know this. It's important to have an animal, because if you're brain dead, you can always write for the dog.
Yeah. It's true. That's true, right? You could always go back to the dog or the cat.
Always go to the dog.
Yeah,
And
because they're
everybody loves the dog. So,
yeah.
whatever you write about the dog, everyone will love it. So, always have a dog or a cat so that, you've got a fallback.
Yes, you got to have that fall. I know and it's true, but you don't fall back on it too often. But
No, no.
the dog Biscuit, right?
Yeah, right.
It's still a wonderful character, and a dog, but thinks as well.
Yeah.
So, but that's great. But I really do think that it is a result of knowing who your characters are and letting in now both controlling them. I know one of the things that I read I think there was an interview with you or a piece about you on the Go Comics page,
Uh-huh.
and a creator profile or something. And I think one of the things that you said was that you were always in control of your characters. And at the same time, it's interesting. I was thinking too, oftentimes you hear that the characters sort of determine their own direction in a way because of
Absolutely.
who they
No,
are.
absolutely. And actually, a great example, I'm kind of, well, I do feel like I'm in control of my characters, but on the other hand, my characters have refused to do things on occasion. And I love the story of how Officer Jackson, who is now married to Val, character Phil, I was, honestly, he just imposed himself on the strip. I was at the beach with my family, and I was unfortunately not on top of my deadlines enough, and I needed to get some writing done. So they were off having a grand time, and I was at the cottage, trying to put together. I just had to write the dialogue. I didn't have to do the whole drawing of the strips. And so it was one of those, like, I don't know, it's Monday morning. What happens? Well, when you're a mom and you're too busy and, you're late for a meeting and that somebody forgot their lunch and you're always racing. And when in my younger years, I was stopped 3 times on the same street, residential street in my neighborhood, by a motorcycle cop because I, pushed a yellow light or forgot to put the tags on my car. They were in the glove box, but I hadn't put them on the plate yet, or, speeding once, So I thought, okay, Val, it's Monday morning. She's late for work. Somebody forgot their lunch. She's trying to get to the school and onto her job, and she's speeding, and she gets pulled over by a motorcycle cop. and that was how I introduced Officer Jackson. And he actually lets her off, which the motorcycle cop that pulled me over 3 times was also very kind to me.
That's great.
And basically, Phil says in the beginning, you just seem like you got so much on your plate. I'm just going to give you a warning. And, so, and she asks him, what if he was some kind of Zen cop,
Yeah, I love that line.
Yeah. So anyway, I just intended that to be a one-off. That was it.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of part 1 of our interview with Jan Eliot. I hope you enjoyed that. Tomorrow or the next day or Monday's part 2 is even better. It's great. We really get into nuts and bolts and talk a lot about the mechanics of cartooning and all kinds of other things, and I think you're really going to get a kick out of it. It's great. Jan is just such a great guest, and it was a lot of fun. Lots coming up. I'll be keeping you informed about stuff that's coming up. I've had some great conversations over the last couple of weeks with some pretty neat cartoonists, so I will fill you in as we move along. And those shows, I hope they'll all be dropping on a regular basis and pretty quickly. I hope, but it takes a little while. It takes a little while for me to edit my gaffes out. Hey, check me out on Instagram, at GroganJeff on Instagram, GroganGeoff. Go there. Be on the lookout. I'm working on a lot of stuff, and it's a place where I share some of that stuff. You might, if you want to go even further and give me some support for this podcast and the work I do here, check me out on Patreon, patreon.com/Jeff Grogan, GeoffGrogan, and any amount that you consider or can use to support this podcast and most of my other endeavors is greatly appreciated. It goes a long way, and you will have my eternal gratitude. Next time, Jan Eliot Part 2. I look forward to seeing you soon. Hopefully it will be a brighter day. In the meantime, wear your mask in public. Be well. Be safe. Stay healthy. And thanks for listening.